A young woman walks through a city gate holding a newborn infant. She has never been with a man. The crowd knows her. The crowd loved her family, and the crowd is screaming. She says nothing. She only points to the child in her arms. And the child, days old, still wrapped in cloth, opens his mouth and speaks. How did we get here? And why has this story divided the world for 2,000 years? To understand, we need to go back, not just years, but generations. There is a family in the history of Bani Israel, the children of Israel, whose name the Quran preserves with deep honor, the family of Imran. And it begins with a woman's prayer. Before her child was born, before she knew whether she was carrying a son or a daughter, a woman named Hannah, the wife of Imran, made a vow to Allah. She dedicated her unborn child to the service of the temple. Not money, not land, not a possession. A child she hadn't yet held, a life she hadn't yet seen. She offered it to her Creator before she knew what she was offering. Think about what that moment actually means. She didn't negotiate terms. She didn't say, if it's a son, I'll dedicate him, and if it's a daughter, maybe next time.
My Lord, I have vowed to you what is in my womb, consecrated for your service.
The gift came before the knowledge. The trust came before the cost. And in Islam, when something is given before you even know what you're giving, that is one of the purest forms of sincerity that a servant can offer their Lord. The child was born a daughter. In the traditions of temple service at that time, daughters did not serve in the way sons did. This was unexpected, and Hannah, holding her newborn girl, said with a mother's honesty,
My Lord, I have delivered a female, and the male is not like the female.
She wasn't complaining. She was being truthful, even with Allah, about her surprise. She named the girl Maryam, but Allah knew what had been given, and Allah accepted it, fully, completely, in a way that far exceeded anything Hannah had intended to offer. The Quran tells us He accepted Maryam with gracious acceptance and caused her to grow in goodness, and He placed her in the care of a prophet, Zakariya, alayhi as-salam, who became her guardian in the temple. She could have said the terms changed when she saw it was a daughter. Instead, she held to what she had promised. And Allah made that daughter, the one born unexpectedly, in the wrong category according to tradition, the most honored woman in all of human history. The years passed. Maryam grew up inside the sacred space of the temple, under the protection of Zakariya alayhi as-salam, an elderly prophet who had dedicated his own life to the worship of Allah. He was her guardian, her teacher, and her provider. And he had carried a quiet ache in his heart for years, a prayer for a son that he had repeated so many times he could no longer remember when it had started. As part of his care for Maryam, Zakariya would enter her private chamber, her mihrab, her prayer room, to bring her provisions, to check on her, the way a father checks on a daughter. One day, he entered her chamber, and he stopped. There was food in the room, fresh fruit, varieties that were not in season, not available anywhere in the market, not something anyone had brought her. He looked at the provisions, and then he looked at her, and he asked simply,
"Oh, Maryam, where did this come from?"
She answered without hesitation,
It is from Allah. Surely Allah provides for whom He wills, without measure.
Zakariya alayhi as-salam was a prophet. He had knowledge and wisdom far beyond ordinary men. And when he saw with his own eyes provision appearing for a young girl in a closed room, without any human explanation, something broke open inside him. Not in doubt, in hope. He had been asking Allah for a son for years. He and his wife were elderly, well beyond the age of childbearing by any human reckoning. He had made the dua. He had made it again. And perhaps in the privacy of his heart he had begun to wonder whether this particular door was simply closed. And then he saw the fruit in Maryam's room. If Allah could send provision through no human means to this girl, sealed behind her screen, asking no one, couldn't he give an aging prophet what he had been requesting for decades? The question answered itself. Zakariya turned from her chamber and immediately called upon his Lord.
My Lord, grant me from yourself a good offspring. Indeed, you are the hearer of supplication.
And Allah responded. An angel came to Zakariya, right there in the temple, while he was standing in prayer, and gave him the news, a son named Yahya, a prophet, a child that would be unlike any before him. The miracle wasn't just Maryam's fruit, it was the chain of trust it triggered, reaching from one person's prayer to another person's miracle, to the birth of the prophet who would one day prepare the world for the most extraordinary story yet to come. Zakariya got his miracle. Yahya was born, his wife's barrenness was overturned by divine command. But Maryam's moment, the one that would shake the entire world, was still ahead. One day, Maryam withdrew from the temple. The Quran uses a specific word for what she did, intabadhat. She seclused herself. She withdrew. She retreated to a place in the eastern direction, away from her family and the people. She placed a hijab, a screen, a curtain, between herself and the world. In the tradition of Islamic scholarship, this withdrawal is understood as an act of sacred seclusion, a deliberate choice to create a protected space for worship, for solitude, for closeness with Allah. She wasn't hiding from anyone. She was making room for something she couldn't yet name. The same pattern runs through the lives of the prophets. Musa alayhi as-salam heard the call of Allah when he was alone in the wilderness, tending animals. Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam received the first revelation in the cave of Hira, in the depths of contemplation. It is in the deepest moments of seclusion, when the noise of people falls away, that Allah sends his most extraordinary interventions. Maryam had done everything right. She had made her sacred space. She had placed her screen. She was completely alone. And then a figure appeared. He stepped into view like any man might, well-formed, upright. Basharan Soian, the Quran says, a perfectly proportioned human being. Nothing about him announced what he was. There was no halo, no wings, no glow. He looked like a man who had walked in through a gap in the curtain. And Maryam, alone, without any guard, without any companion, saw him and felt the alarm rise in her chest immediately. What she did next reveals everything about who she was. She did not wait nervously. She did not stay silent and hope he would leave. Without hesitation, she said,
I seek refuge in the most merciful from you. So leave me, if you should be fearing of Allah.
She spoke first. She spoke clearly. She invoked the name of her Lord as her shield. We often imagine piety as something soft, passive, always yielding. But Maryam's response shows us something different. A woman who had spent her entire young life in the sacred practice of faith, and who knew in the core of her being exactly how to protect the boundary of that sacred space. She didn't know she was speaking to an angel. She only knew she was alone, and a man had appeared, and she would protect her honor before anything else. That is not weakness. That is the character that made her worthy of what came next. The figure did not flinch.
I am only the messenger of your Lord to give you news of a pure boy.
Maryam's mind moved quickly. She was a rational woman, a woman of knowledge and devotion. And what the angel had just said was, by every law of nature she had ever known, impossible.
How can I have a son, when no man has ever touched me, and I have not been unchaste?
It is a beautiful question, and it is the honest question. There was no doubt in it, no rejection of Allah's power. There was only a mind asking, by what mechanism? By what natural path? How? And the angel gave her the answer that has echoed through human history ever since.
Your Lord says, "It is easy for me, and we will make him a sign to the people and a mercy from us. And it is a matter already decreed."
Already decreed, the decision has been made. The event will happen because Allah has willed it, and nothing in creation has the authority to revise that decision. He didn't explain the mechanics. He stated simply, "This will happen because I have decided it will happen." And that in the wilderness alone, with the whole world unaware, was enough. She accepted. She submitted. The angel fulfilled his mission and left. And Maryam, alone in the eastern wilderness, with no one aware of what had just passed, between her and the messenger of the Most High, began the most extraordinary journey any woman in history has ever walked. Months passed, and then the hour of birth arrived. There is no gentle way to tell this part of the story. Maryam was far from everyone she knew. There was no midwife, no sister, no mother, no one who had been through this before, to hold her hand and tell her she was going to be all right. The pains of childbirth had found her in the wilderness, that place of sacred seclusion she had chosen, and they were not gentle with her. She grabbed the trunk of a palm tree. That detail, a woman in labor reaching out for something solid, something to hold, something that wouldn't move, is one of the most human details in the entire Quran. Not a vision, not a spiritual experience removed from the body. A woman in real pain grabbing the bark of a tree with both hands, the way anyone would. And in her pain, physical agony, emotional devastation, the full weight of everything she had carried for months crashing down on her at once, she cried out,
Oh, I wish I had died before this, that I had been forgotten, a thing unremembered.
This was Maryam, the woman chosen above all the women of the world, the woman to whom an angel had come, the woman who had accepted the most extraordinary news in human history. And in this moment alone, in pain, terrified of what would come when people saw her, she wished she had never existed. If Allah allowed her to feel that, then He is telling us something important about the nature of being chosen. Being chosen does not mean being protected from pain, it means being sustained through it. The worst moment of your life and the greatest miracle of your life can occupy the same night. And then the voice came. From beneath her a stream of running water had appeared. Do not grieve. Your Lord has provided beneath you a stream. And shake toward you the trunk of the palm tree. It will drop upon you ripe, fresh dates. So eat and drink and be content. The dates fell, the water ran, and with them came a final instruction. If you see from among humanity anyone say, I have vowed to the most merciful a fast of speech, so I will not speak today to any human being. She would not have to explain this herself. She would not have to argue her case in the village square. Allah was taking responsibility for her. He was saying, I sent you on this mission, I'll handle the questions. Point to the miracle and let the miracle speak. There is perhaps no deeper form of trust than learning to stop trying to explain yourself. Because you know the one who sent you is already writing the answer. Maryam ate, she drank, she rested, she wrapped the child in cloth. And then, step by careful step, she turned toward the city and began to walk. The city gates were ahead of her. The people who had known Maryam all her life were there. People who remembered her father, people who had watched her grow up in the temple, who had seen the devotion she carried in everything she did, people who would have described her before this day as the last person on earth capable of what they were about to assume. She walked toward them carrying a newborn child. The reaction was immediate. There is no other way to describe it. It erupted. Some were furious, some wept, some stood frozen in disbelief. And the words that came, the words the Quran preserves exactly as they were said, were more devastating than a direct accusation because they used her integrity against her. "O Maryam, you have done something unprecedented. O sister of Harun, your father was not a man of evil, and your mother was not unchaste." Think about how precisely that strikes. They didn't say, "You're shameless." They said, "We know your family. We know who your father was. We know the woman your mother was. And because of them, because of what they were, this is even more unthinkable." The cruelest accusations are always the ones that know exactly where to strike. They found the thing Maryam valued most, her family's honor, her inheritance of righteous character, and they turned it into the weapon. The voices rose. Some were grieving, some accusing, all of them looking at the newborn in her arms and drawing the conclusion that seemed to be the only one available. And Maryam said nothing. She simply lifted one hand and pointed. The crowd's reaction was impatience. How can we speak to a child who is in the cradle? It was frustration masquerading as logic. It was what people say when they don't want to be disrupted. And then the child opened his mouth. The infant, days old, still wrapped in cloth, held in the arms of a woman who had not yet slept, spoke, clearly, with words.
"Indeed, I am the servant of Allah.
There was a silence unlike any the city gate had ever known.
He has given me the scripture and made me a prophet. And he has made me blessed wherever I am and has enjoined upon me prayer and zakah as long as I remain alive. And peace is on me the day I was born, and the day I will die, and the day I am raised alive."
Notice what he said first, not the miracles, not the announcement that something extraordinary is happening. The very first thing Isa alayhi as-salam ever said, with his first breath of speech, was, "I am the servant of Allah." Before the credentials, before the mission statement, before the announcement of Scripture, the declaration of servitude, the complete, humble, absolute acknowledgement that he belongs to his Lord. In the message of the Quran, this is the most important truth about Isa alayhi as-salam. Before everything he would do, he was and always called himself a servant of God. He begins with that. He will end with that, and everything in between flows from that. A man who had known Maryam's father stood among the accusers. He had been among the loudest voices moments before, and when the infant spoke, he fell quiet in a way that was different from the silence of the others. The others were processing. He was shattered. He looked at the child. He looked at Maryam. And he had no words left, not accusations, not arguments, nothing. The miracle had answered before he could. The Quran does not tell us the cradle speech converted everyone. It tells us it happened. Some believed. Many did not. Human beings have an extraordinary capacity to witness the impossible and still find a way to resist it. The miracle of the cradle was not a crowd-control device. It was a sign. What people chose to do with the sign was entirely their own. And centuries later, generations after that city gate, the words the infant spoke would travel. Jafar ibn Abi Talib would stand before the Negus, the Christian king of Abyssinia, and recite the opening of Surah Maryam. The king would listen, and when he heard the account of Isa, born without a father, speaking from the cradle, declaring himself the servant of Allah, the Negus would weep until his beard was wet. He drew a line in the dirt with a stick and said, "The difference between what you say and what we say about Jesus is no wider than this line. Two communities, one truth at the center of both. And the words that divided them were the same words spoken by an infant at a city gate 2,000 years before." There is a theological question at the heart of this story that the Quran addresses with extraordinary elegance. Allah tells us in Surah Al-Imran the most complete answer to the confusion surrounding Isa alayhi as-salam. Indeed, the example of Isa with Allah is like the example of Adam. He created him from dust. Then he said to him, "Be," and he was. Adam had no father and no mother. He was formed from earth and given life by divine command, with no biological antecedent at all, and no one debates Adam's humanity. Isa alayhi as-salam had no father, but he had a mother. He was created in a womb by a woman of flesh and blood, born with the reality of a human birth. He required food, water, sleep. He grew from a child to a man. If the absence of both parents doesn't make Adam divine, why would the absence of one parent make the one who came after divine? The word kun, be, was said to Adam in the dust of the earth. The same word was said to Isa in the womb of Maryam. In both cases, a human being came into existence by direct divine command. The argument is complete in a single sentence. He would grow, and when he grew, the miracles would not stop. They would multiply. Years passed, and the boy who had spoken from the cradle became a man. When Isa alayhi as-salam began his mission, the people who witnessed him quickly understood that what they were seeing had no precedent in living memory. He would take a handful of clay and shape it into the form of a bird, small, delicate, the kind of thing a child might make in the dirt. And then he would breathe into it, and it would open its wings and it would fly. He would stand before someone who had never seen the light of day. Someone born into blindness who had grown up knowing the world only through sound and touch. And by the permission of Allah, he would restore what had never been there. He would encounter a leper, someone whom society had long ago concluded was beyond any hope. And by Allah's permission, he would cleanse the disease from them as though it had never settled in their skin. And there were moments, quiet, devastating moments, when someone stood over the body of someone they had loved, someone who had already left this world, and Isa alayhi as-salam would call to them, and they would answer. Every single time, every single miracle, wrapped in the same phrase. Bi'idnillah, by Allah's permission. He didn't take credit. He didn't allow any gap to open between himself and his Lord. The healing is Allah's, the restoration is Allah's, the returning of the dead to life is Allah's. Isa alayhi as-salam was the vessel, the willing, humble, completely subordinate vessel, through which Allah chose to make his signs visible. A healer who heals by permission is not inviting you to worship the healer. He is showing you the power of the one who issued the permission. Word spread, and with the word came followers. One day, Isa alayhi as-salam looked at the people around him and asked a question that cut through all of it.
Who will be my helpers toward Allah?
Not, who believes in what I'm preaching? But who will walk with me in the direction of God, for the sake of God, defining themselves by God rather than by the man standing in front of them? A group of men stepped forward, the Hawariyun, the disciples. They were ordinary men, fishermen, men whose hands were rough and whose lives were quiet, not scholars, not men of religious authority. And they said, "We are the helpers of Allah, Ansar Allah. Not your helpers, not we support your cause." They used the most precise possible language. We define ourselves by our relationship to the Most High. What they chose in that moment was not safe. The religious leaders of Bani Israel were already threatened by Isa's growing influence. The Roman authorities who governed the land had their own concerns about any figure who attracted large gatherings. To publicly align yourself with this man was to invite scrutiny, surveillance, and worse. They could have believed quietly. They could have kept to themselves. Instead, they stepped forward publicly before witnesses and claimed a title so powerful that centuries later the companions of the final prophet, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, would choose the same word, Ansar, helpers, the highest form of support, not passive agreement, active belonging. The first of them to step forward was Shamun al-Safa, who would come to be known in history as Simon Peter. He was a fisherman, a man of the water, practical, direct, unimpressed by ceremony, patient in the way that only people who have spent years waiting for fish to bite can be patient. When Isa alayhi as-salam asked his question, Shamun didn't look around to see what others were doing. He didn't wait for the movement of the crowd to carry him forward. He simply stepped. The willingness to step forward first before anyone else has validated the choice. That is a character the Quran honors throughout all of sacred history. Not the loudest, not the most educated, the one who moves before it's safe to move. Their test of loyalty, however, was still ahead. They came to Isa alayhi as-salam with a request. Can your Lord send down to us a table spread with food from the heaven? He warned them immediately.
Fear Allah if you should be believers.
The weight of what they were asking sat in the air between them. They pressed on. Not in defiance, in honesty. We wish to eat of it and have our hearts reassured, and know that you have been truthful to us, and we be among the witnesses to it. They had already seen him heal the blind. They had watched him raise the dead. They had witnessed the clay birds fly. What more evidence did they need? But witnessing and resting are different things. Between seeing a miracle and having your heart fully at peace about it, there is a distance that no single event necessarily closes. The disciples were being painfully, vulnerably honest about where they were. They believed, but they wanted their hearts to catch up with their eyes, and they wanted to eat from a table sent by the Lord of the universe. Not for the food, but to feel in that moment of eating the presence and care of the one they had chosen. Isa alayhi as-salam made dua. He said,
O Allah, our Lord, send down to us a table spread with food from the heaven, to be for us a festival for the first of us and the last of us, and a sign from you.
Allah responded. A hush fell over the disciples first, the kind of silence that precedes something unprecedented. And then it appeared. The Maida, the miraculous feast descending from above, to a group of men who had asked for the ultimate reassurance. They looked at each other. They looked at what was before them. Some wept. Some could not find words. The ordinary air of the ordinary world had just broken open in front of them. But with the table came the most severe warning in the entire story of Isa alayhi as-salam. Allah said, if any of you disbelieve after this, I will punish him with a punishment the like of which I will not inflict upon anyone among the worlds. After the Maida, no one who had been present could ever claim they needed more evidence. The door of excuse was closed. The grace was given, and the weight of what it meant to receive it and then turn away was unlike anything in the history of prophethood before it. Some of those who witnessed it grew in their faith. Others hardened their hearts. And in the halls of the religious establishment, the priests and leaders of Bani Israel, the men whose authority Isa's presence threatened, a quieter, colder calculation was already taking place. The real problem was never a lack of evidence. It was power. And what happens when a message that comes from above threatens the power that resides below? The priests knew that Isa alayhi as-salam was drawing people away from their authority, away from the systems they controlled. The Romans knew that any figure who attracted thousands and spoke of a new kingdom was a political risk that could not be left unaddressed. Two different fears converging on the same conclusion. The Quran gives us one line to describe what came next, and it is one of the most powerful lines in the entire story of prophethood. And they planned, and Allah planned, and Allah is the best of planners. Behind closed doors, a conspiracy was taking shape, a name was being circulated. A location would be arranged, soldiers would be involved. And one person, someone who had eaten at the same table as Isa alayhi as-salam, who had traveled the same roads, who had heard the Injil recited in his presence, agreed to inform. The net was closing, the night of decision was approaching, And Isa alayhi as-salam already knew. On the last night, the night that historians would debate across generations, Isa alayhi as-salam gathered his disciples. The room was quiet in the way that rooms are quiet when everyone knows something is coming, but no one says it. He had warned them before he had told them, in the way prophets tell people things they will only understand later. What is ahead of us is going to be unlike anything we have faced. He had made dua. He had prepared them, not for his continued presence, but for continuity without him. He was not asking them to fight. He was asking them to remember, to carry, to not be broken by what was coming. There is something heartbreaking about this moment. This was a man who had healed the blind with a touch, who had called the dead back to life by the permission of Allah. And on this night, in a small room surrounded by 12 ordinary men, the most powerful man in Palestine was the quietest man in the room. He didn't call for an army. He didn't organize a counter-strategy. He sat. He warned. He prayed. He prepared the ones he loved for a world that would carry his name long after his visible presence was gone. A prophet who prepares his followers for a world without him, rather than fighting with every resource available to stay, is a prophet whose trust in Allah's plan is so complete that his own removal from the scene is something he can accept. He did not pray, "Let me stay." He prepared them. That is the character of a servant. And in that room, on that night, at least one man had already arranged something. The soldiers came through the darkness. Their informant knew the location. He knew the layout, the timing, the faces of the people who would be there. He had eaten at the same table as Isa alayhi as-salam. He had been one of the Hawariyun, one of the men who had stepped forward that day, and called himself a helper of Allah. The hand that had once raised in prayer was now pointing into the dark. The soldiers moved toward the figures they could see, and then something happened that cannot be explained by any natural law. Confusion descended on them. Allah veiled their perception. The one they had come for, the face they had been told to look for, was no longer visible to their eyes in the way they expected. The Quran states it plainly. It was made to resemble him to them. Another man, the one they seized, appeared in their sight as the man they thought they were taking. People often picture this night as chaotic and violent. But what the Quran focuses on isn't the chaos, it's the confusion of the captors. They came with certainty, and they left confused, even as they believed they had succeeded. The most hunted man in the region was no longer where they thought he was, and they did not know it. The informant had pointed into the dark, the soldiers had moved, and they believed their target was in their hands. They were wrong. Where was Isa alayhi as-salam? The answer the Quran gives is the most powerful single sentence in this entire story. Rather, Allah raised him to himself, and ever is Allah exalted in might and wise. He was lifted. No drama, no elaborate escape, no human assistance. Allah made a decision that this servant would not be killed, would not be crucified, would not be touched by the plans of those who had gathered against him, and acted on it with the same absolute authority he brings to every decision he makes. Of all the miracles in this story, the cradle speech, the healing of the blind, the clay birds that flew, the dead returned to life, this one is stated in the quietest possible way. Allah raised him, because when Allah acts, he does not need to announce himself. He simply does what he has decided. He is there right now, as these words are heard. The Prophet Isa ibn Maryam alayhi as-salam is alive. In a realm beyond our perception, beyond our current access, waiting for the command to return. Not gone, waiting. His enemies on that night believed they had won. They celebrated. They went to sleep convinced that the story was over. But there was still one conversation remaining, one that would happen outside of time on a day unlike any other, and it would settle everything. forever. The Quran describes a moment on the Day of Judgment that carries more weight than any battle, any debate, any theological argument the world has ever produced. Allah will ask Isa ibn Maryam alayhi as-salam directly, "O Isa, son of Maryam, did you say to the people, 'Take me and my mother as gods besides Allah?'" Everything pauses for the answer.
Subhanaka, glory be to you. It was not for me to say what I had no right to say. If I had said it, you would have known it. You know what is within myself, and I do not know what is within yourself. Indeed, it is you who is knower of the unseen. I said nothing to them except what you commanded me, that they should worship Allah, my Lord and your Lord.
The most misunderstood prophet in the history of human civilization stands before the one who created him in front of all of creation and gives the complete answer. Not defensive, not arguing, simply, "Glory be to you. I only said what you commanded. Everything else is yours to judge." In that surrender, that complete, unhesitating, total surrender of his own knowledge to Allah's infinite knowledge, the confusion of 2,000 years is resolved. The man who was called what he never called himself, who was worshipped in ways he never asked to be worshipped, stands there and says, "You know? You have always known, and that is enough." And now, after all of this, there is one more thing you need to know about Isa ibn Maryam alayhi as-salam. He is coming back. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam spoke about this with complete certainty. It is among the most firmly established matters of the last days in Islamic tradition, reported in Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, and the major collections.
"By the one in whose hand is my soul,"
He said,
"the Son of Mary will soon descend among you as a just ruler."
"He will descend near Damascus. He will pray Fajr, the dawn prayer behind the Imam of the Muslims that day. Because his return is not as a new message, but as a continuation, a servant of the final and complete revelation. He will break the cross, not as a gesture against any people, but as a correction. The theological confusion that was built around his name across centuries in his absence will be undone by his very presence. He will live for a period, die a natural death, and be buried. The prophet who was hunted and raised, who was misunderstood and raised, who was the most debated figure in human history, is alive waiting, and will return in the body of a man who prays and eats and walks and breathes, to complete a story that began in a city when a woman pointed to a baby. The raising was not an end, it was a pause. Let me step out of this story for just a moment, because there is one thing about Maryam, alayha as-salam, that I don't want us to pass in a rush. She was accused by the people who knew her best, by the community that had watched her grow up, by the voices that carried the weight of social judgment in her world, and they used the most precise and painful instruments available. Her father's memory, her mother's honor, her own established reputation as a person of extraordinary piety. They turned all of that against her, and she said nothing. Not because she had nothing to say, not because she was unable to defend herself. She said nothing because Allah told her not to, and because she trusted Him enough to let go of the fight that felt most urgent and let Him handle it. What do we do when the whole world is wrong about us? When the people who have known us for years decide in a moment that they know something about us that isn't true? The instinct, the very human, very understandable instinct, is to explain, to correct the record in every space where the record has been distorted. Maryam lowered her hand, pointed to the child in her arms, and rested. That kind of trust is not passive. It is one of the hardest things a human being can do. To decide, I am not going to fight this battle myself. I'm going to hand it over to the one who already knows the truth, and wait for his answer to come. If he sent a stream and fresh dates to a woman alone in the wilderness, if he gave out-of-season provision to a girl in a sealed room, if he let a newborn speak incomplete sentences to an accusing crowd, Then he is capable of sending the truth of your situation to the people who need to hear it, in ways you cannot engineer yourself. The story of Isa ibn Maryam alayhi as-salam is not a story you watch from a distance. It is a story that is still unfolding. The return he promised, the descent, the correction, the completion, may come in our lifetimes. And when he comes, the world will witness the end of a story that began with one woman's quiet surrender at a city gate. She pointed, she trusted, and God did the rest. A throne was moved from one end of the world to the other before a man could even blink. The ants of a valley saw an army approaching, 10,000 strong, and warned each other to get underground before the king arrived. And the king on his horse at the front of his army heard every word the ants said. Jinn, winds, birds organized into formations, a ring that gave its holder a power no one else in human history has ever held. Who was this man? The story of the prophet who was given a kingdom unlike anything before him or after him. Prophet Sulaiman, alayhi as-salam, the king of 3 worlds. Coming up next, stay with us.